subject then? What is the subject produced by the discourse of critical security studies? How is the individual conceived if the individual needs to be emancipated? Correctly deprived of agency. Objectified. So how is the individual conceived? What have we learned? What have we seen? The individual is seen as what? It's two words. Yeah, two words. How can we express it in two words? Huh? No. Bare life, yeah, thanks. Just put this on. Bare life. Okay, thanks. Correct answer. Let's move on. So, however, it reproduces, in my view, the subject of human security as bare life. So what critical security studies does is it still seeks to emancipate this actor, this individual rational actor, and to empower the individual to see the choices which are available to her or to him. So this involves a prior intervention which is necessary and a prior objectification of the individual, particularly if we look at the words of emancipation. Now, I think I don't have a lot of time left, so what I wanted to do, I'm going to very briefly go through the Copenhagen School in a couple of minutes, but I want to end on looking at my understanding of critical human security. What I should mention is that human security has been critiqued by people who work on securitization. They belong to this transnational school called the Copenhagen School. Nobody who works on this is located in Copenhagen. They met for a conference in Copenhagen once. So Barry Bazan is at the London School of Economics. Ole Weaver is in Norway somewhere. Jaap de Wilde is in the Netherlands. They're all seen as securitization theorists, and we talk in terms of the Copenhagen School. But it has nothing to do with Denmark or Copenhagen. But one key element or term I haven't introduced you to but deployed has been securitization. Now, the Copenhagen School, whoever they are, focus on the power of narrative and discourse. So whenever we use the term security, we securitize. Securitize means to make security more important than it is, to make security a goal, a value. So securitization here allows the state to control various aspects of our life. So if we look at conventional human security, the state has a responsibility to protect. From the broad approach, the state has to protect us from a range of existential threats. This means that the state needs to expend its power over us in order to protect us. This may result in greater insecurity, since the state should be a source of this insecurity. Now, recently there have been attempts at desecuritization, but this is not really used within the literature. Desecuritization means to make security less important to our everyday life. It's seen as technical rather than transformative. And it looks at the role which securitized subjects play in desecuritizing themselves is ignored. You won't get a question on this because it's not, related here. I'm going through this very quickly. It's a very well-established school, but it has very little relevance to human security because it rejects human security. It just says whenever we use human security, we are securitizing. So in order to desecuritize, we should use the term security. But my problem with this is it still reduces individuals to bare life. Basically what it says is, if we look at, let's say, the previous discussion we had over a dam. Now, if we are going to say that it is imperative for India to construct a dam in, let's say, the northeast, in order, in the interests of human security or national security, then what this involves is extending the power of the state over people, over individuals. Desecuritization means not using the term security, using the term development. So basically, what we're doing is we're using a different discourse. However, my point is that there's still very little agency involved for human beings. It's at the level of the state, whether they call it security or they call it development. So what I would like, and I'll expand upon this tomorrow, to look at, is to look at ways in which we can articulate a critical perspective of human security, which takes culture. You don't need to take a picture of this, you'll be seeing this tomorrow, which takes culture and the cultural embeddedness of the individual as the starting point. So if we look at human security, our generic definition is the right to live in freedom and dignity, free from poverty and despair. We haven't done anything with dignity. But dignity is a concept which invokes ideas of respect, but also invokes ideas of the sacred. So dignity is expressed differently within Hindu and Muslim communities, within different cultures, within East Asia and South Asia. There are different conceptions here of dignity. We cannot generalize what an understanding of dignity is divorced from power structures. Divorced from culture. So what I'm trying to posit is what I look at as, in terms, a post-secular conception of human security, which recognizes the multiple religious or religio-cultural context in which freedom and dignity is embedded. So my argument is our understanding of freedom and our understanding of dignity differs. Even within this room, it could differ. But it doesn't differ according to your individual preference. It differs according to the cultural assumptions which you have accepted or rejected. So in this sense, you work with something. There is still an element of agency there. You can accept or reject a cultural norm. But in order to understand it as a cultural norm, you have to be socialized into it. And I think that this is where we can basically reconceptualize or move the conversation forward when we're looking at human security. So Mustafa Kemal Pasha, in his edited volume, which also contributed on globalization, human security, and difference, argued that a serious engagement with cultural difference is necessary if human security is to be universal. And what I've tried to do in my work is to look at religion as an important source or important sources of cultural difference, capable of helping us recover the bios of human existence. Okay, I think I've run out of time, but what I will do tomorrow, don't take a picture of this, so you'll see this tomorrow. What I'll attempt to do tomorrow is explain this table. What I'm not trying to do is to categorize. I'm not trying to basically essentialize or homogenize different views within South Asia. But what I am trying to say is that our secular understanding of human security is just one understanding. So it's mainly plural. What I'm attempting to do is to pluralize human security. Now, this is not for a South Asian audience. It's mainly for those who believe there is only one understanding of human security. But I'll be interested tomorrow in your understandings of human security, and whether you see that whether there is a universal conception of human security which you can agree upon, or you believe that different particular conceptions which derive from your own cultural backgrounds. And I think this is perhaps a question which we can look at tomorrow. So remember, this is a question mark, pluralizing human security in South Asia. More of the article. Okay, we have questions for discussion which we'll look at tomorrow, but I will answer any questions on the lecture tomorrow. Okay, thank you very much. Yes, of course. I can send, email me and I can send it to you.
So, okay. So this concludes the day 4 of this advanced studies in human security under the GIAN program. So thank you very much. Tomorrow is the day 5, which is Friday. Couple of things on Friday during the tea break at 3 o'clock, okay? Before you go for a tea break, I'll request you to fill up a feedback form, how the course is going, all those things, okay? It should not take you more than a few minutes. That's one thing. And tomorrow, as you know, we have this Friday prayer thing, so there may be few minutes delay, okay? So don't go away, okay? So please be here on time, 1:30, 1:40, okay? But please be reminded that, you know, the mosque is pretty close by, so that may be a little bit overcrowded. So please bear with us, okay? So we'll start maybe a few minutes late, okay? But we intend to start at 2 o'clock, all right? So I think that's all for today. So thank you very much. And it's great that Professor Rumki Basu, my esteemed colleague, is here. So it's much better than buy one and get one as an extra bonus, and a good bonus to have, okay? So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Because human security in South Asia is the focus of our...
Yeah, another thing, as those people who are having the students of political science, public and human rights, you know, our department has got a very privileged and very endowed fellowship from the UGC University Grant Commission for a 5-year term, 2016 to 2021, okay? And one of the thrust area that we identified and we competed and we got it is the human security angle. And I am the coordinator and Professor Basu is the deputy coordinator. So there will be seminar, conferences, symposia, roundtables, colloquia, okay, for the next 5 years, okay. Human security is an important component of that. So who knows, Professor Shani may be back in another avatar. Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.
All these discussions are important. Thank you so much.
No, thank you.
Yes.
States, are they counter-hegemonic social forces? Huh? Yes or no? So they're hegemonic social forces or counter-hegemonic? Counter-hegemonic is against the prevailing hegemony. Which one? Huh?
They are probably hegemonic social forces.
So you say they're hegemonic social forces. So then would you agree that SDGs may be seen as an attempt at critical human security?
So basically the existing political or the social order, if a solution has to come from that particular social order, then of course there lies a minimal role of state in order to, because the resources generally are on the kind of process, it can only be accentuated and, by the efforts of the state only. So state has to take the initial call. But then within the existing framework, they can, they can provide solutions to it. So I think that...
So is this seen as problem solving or critical, SDGs?
So I guess they have the SDGs, looking at the different indicators and the kind of, because it has happened over a period of time. They had that MDG, and after that, now they are contemplating on SDGs. So what is happening that, they have contemplated that, the problem solving technique has, yielded a significant result, but still that is debatable. So now what they have done is that, under the SDG framework, they are trying to again look into the certain issues, and try to solve it from that perspective itself.
Okay, what do others think? So the question is about SDGs, whether SDGs can be seen as an attempt at the application of critical theory to human security, or can they be seen as a problem-solving approach? Sorry, you may not have heard this. Can SDGs be seen as an attempt to apply critical theory to the study of human security, or can it be seen as a problem-solving approach? So we've heard from 3 people. I think it's a good question.
Sir, it can be seen as application of critical perspective, because SDGs, that is coming out of the critique of the traditional model of development. Means where actually we are talking about sustainable development, means the traditional model of development that has failed somewhere to take into consideration the means environmental concerns and other concerns for the future generation, as well as the present generation, as well as future generation. So that is why it can be taken as some critical perspective towards human security.
Okay, thank you. Who would agree or who would disagree? You would agree, Peter?
No, I would think. What was the question?
The question is about SDGs.
I would think that sustainable development goals would be a part of the problem-solving theory, in the sense that while the discussion yesterday, there was one point that emerged at the end of it, and that was the conflict between development and security. So I do not think that sustainable development goals would be an application of critical theory. I would see it more of as a problem-solving theory, because at the end of the day, it is again prioritizing the state that takes the decisions. Policies.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have 2 views. I'm not saying which view is correct or which view is not correct. But the point is, I would like you to see the difference between critical approaches and problem-solving approaches to human security. Now, do you have any question on critical human security? And particularly the attempt to apply a critical security studies framework. This was part of the lecture yesterday. So Foucault's critical perspectives are concerned with the possibilities for liberation that are imminent within existing and political relations. In Booth's words, they engage in imminent critique, the rejection of utopian blueprints in favor of the discovery of latent potentials on which to build political and social progress. The objective of critical security studies, therefore, is the emancipation of individuals from structural oppression suffered on account of gender, class, or race. Now, Ted Human has argued that a critical security studies framework can be applied to human security. I think there are 2 objections to the application of critical security studies to human security from a critical perspective. What objections could this be? So in other words, we should look at the objective of critical human security to be, again, the emancipation of individuals from structural oppression suffered on account of gender, class, or race. Yes, yeah, over there.
I'm Priyabala.
Yep.
So I feel that it is difficult actually to apply critical security studies to human security, because it per se does not provide an alternative as such, because within critical studies itself you have gender, class, race. So what are they talking about in particular? As in whether they will refer to gender as a
Okay, thank you. But focusing more on the application of CSS to human security, what problems can you see? Okay, Preeta, yeah.
I think there are mainly two problems. One is it becomes a discourse that is appropriated by the state. And secondly, it...
Let's stop there. That's the first one. That's very important. This is the point which Ken Booth and the Critical Security Studies School make. That's why they don't use human security. They don't use human security because they believe human security has been appropriated by the state, because it is used as a problem-solving theory and does not call into question an international society which is structured around sovereign states and structured by hegemonic social forces. So I think that's a very important objection. There's another objection, an objection which I've made and others have made as well to the application of CSS to human security. Yep, Shivana.
It's not, in order for it to be universal, it has to be religious.
It has to be, sorry?
It has to take into consideration different religious and cultural contexts as well. So that's what.
Very good, yeah. So what is the object? We talk about the objective of critical security studies, or the objective of critical human security. But what is the subject here of human security? Who are we meant to be emancipating? Humans, but what sort of understanding of the human is this?
They just treat them as bare life.
Sorry?
They just treat humans as bare life and individual, nothing more than that.
That's my view. So, but what do you understand here by bare life?
That they are, without the context of culture, value-free, culture-free and religious-free, they're just living their life and not related with us, means less socialized.
Basically, they're not considering the fact that human being is a social person. He is supposed to have attachments to the cultures and, others' social attachments. So yeah, that is what it is.
Yeah, very good. I think this is exactly what I and others understand by bare life. But when we look at the concept of emancipation, what does emancipation involve? Yep.
Sir, they are looking at the physical state of existence of an individual.
Sorry?
So they are looking at the only at the physical state of existence of an individual.
Yeah.
That's
Very good. So when we try to emancipate others, what are we doing? What's the process if I say I need to, in a way, empowerment, this is a critique also of empowerment. If we look at empowerment within the context of education, I am meant to be, as a GIAN scholar, I'm meant to be empowering you by introducing you to different theories of human security and security studies in general. This will put you in a position where you can make decisions about which form of security or which form of human security, which type of human security you find most convincing. So this will be an example of empowerment. But what is this premised upon? The idea of empowerment, the idea also of emancipation. Sorry? I would agree with you, but before we get to secularization, just in a general, everyday usage of the term, empowerment or particularly emancipation.
So, to make someone free from servitude and slavery?
Yeah, to make somebody free. So what's the assumption based there? Yeah, I agree, a civilizing mission. Yeah, the assumption is there is a self and there is another. And the implicit assumption is that the self is empowered, is emancipated, and that the self can empower or emancipate others who are not. So this is based on an objectification of human beings. Human beings therefore become objects to be liberated, objects to be emancipated. This is not a problem in itself if we talk in terms of policy, but it is a problem in terms of from the perspective of critical theory in whether it actually challenges hegemonic social structures or hegemonic social forces. Because a hegemonic social forces would be premised on the idea that there are certain truth claims which those hegemonic social forces are privileged to, and that these truth claims can be disseminated to others. This is the way human development works. This is the way human security works as well. So it's dissemination of this idea of truth so that we can free others, we can empower others, we can emancipate others. So my argument, and those of some others, would be that it reproduces the subject of human security as, in Giorgio Agamben's words, bare life, a life which is stripped of attachments to others. It's not, it's an unencumbered individual, an individual unencumbered by cultural attachments to family, to society, to religion, to kinship groups. Okay, now what I would like to do in the remaining time would be to go through my understanding of post-secular human security. We didn't have a lot of time to do it yesterday, so I would like to spend more time going through this. So the working definition of human security, which we've been using through the course, is to understand human security as the right to live in freedom and dignity, free from poverty and despair. This comes from the United Nations General Assembly resolution in 2012. And the key term here is dignity. Dignity is not a concept which can be universally understood. So in my view, a post-secular conception of human security should recognize the multiple religio-cultural contexts in which freedom and dignity is embedded. So the argument here, I'll give you an argument from Japan, which is interesting. The term freedom, the Chinese character for freedom, jiu, is actually an invention of the Meiji Restoration. It entered the Japanese vocabulary, and they created a Chinese character for it after the opening up of Japan in the Meiji Restoration of 1867. What this meant was that although there were different understandings of freedom within Japan, there was not an all-encompassing word for freedom. This all-encompassing universal expression for freedom only entered the language after the internationalization of Japan and opening up of Japan. And I'm wondering whether similar ideas here can apply within South Asia, within the myriad different religious or cultural contexts, whether ideas of freedom have a context which can transcend a particular cultural context in which it is part of. So we can look at ideas like moksha within Hinduism, nirvana within Buddhism. These have specific connotations. Can we extract these and universalize these? The argument I'm making is that actually it's difficult. You know, I would say that we should engage more with these local understandings and understand who is to be freed from what, in what particular context. Okay, so first question I have is, what do you understand by the term secular?
Mineral Islam resource, it has two connotations, that secular. That one means that indifferent to religion, another is equal treatment to religion.
Yeah, the equal treatment to religion is very much the Indian variant on secularism. And this could actually be seen, this is my student Surbi Kati, she did her master's under my supervision in Japan, and she argues it's a form of post-secularism. So it can be seen as a form of post-secularism. But secularism itself, indifference to religion, would be a minimization, at the very least, of the role of religion within the public sphere, within political life. Now, conventionally within the West, there are two variants. The first variant is the separation of religion from politics from the private and public spheres. So basically expelling religion from the public sphere so that it's part only of the private sphere, privatization of religion. This is particularly prevalent within the United States of America. The second is laicity or laicité within French, which is actually based on the forcible expulsion of religion from the public sphere. So the argument is you can only have a public sphere which is equal to all if religion is expelled from it. And I think if we look at the Indian variant of secularism, this is very much shows the influence of Gandhiji on Indian political life, because Nehru was probably more in favor of the privatization of religion, if not, if you read the discovery of India, the actual expulsion of religion from the public sphere. So by post-secularism, I'm basically talking about post-secularism can be understood in two terms. Firstly, as a temporal arrangement. Temporally, post-secularism means the continuation of the project of secularism in a world of religious diversity. The probably most important variant of this, or the most important, example of this, is the work of Jürgen Habermas, the German critical theorist. And Habermas has deployed the use of the post-secular. And for him, the post-secular public sphere means a limited role for religion. So like most critical theorists, Habermas is committed to the Enlightenment project. He believes in secularism. But the problem for him would be in his own society of Germany, many people are still religious. And more importantly, given the migration into Germany, the transformation of Germany, Germany now has 14.9% of its population is foreign-born. This is significant because Germany, like Japan, defines itself very much as an ethnic nation-state. Citizenship used to be, and to a certain extent still is, defined by jus sanguinis, by blood or kinship ties. So for Habermas, what is necessary is to try and integrate these immigrants who come into Germany, many of whom are religious and have different faiths. So his argument is not exclusion, but inclusion. But inclusion means the translation of faith-based claims into a secular language which is intelligible to everybody. So this idea of translation means your argument needs to be understandable to me, and I may not share your religious beliefs. So this is part of the process. Post-secularism, therefore, is premised on a secularization of religious claims. They need to be secularized in order for us to understand them and accept them. He gives some good examples, one of which I'm going to probably expand about by looking at his own tradition, which is a Christian tradition. So in his debates with Cardinal Ratzinger, who was Pope Benedict the 17th, and he's a retired pope, the world's only retired pope. In a series of debates, Habermas talked in terms of a Christian concept of the right to life. The Christian concept of we are all created in God's image, being translated into a language of human rights. So if Christians are to posit we are all created in God's image, and to posit this as an assumption within the public sphere, and to create legislation on it, this would not be intelligible to everybody. This would not be intelligible to those who are secular, those who are Muslim, those who come from different cultural traditions. So instead, they need to translate it into the idea of a universal right to life, which makes no reference to God. But it's post-secular because the claim the claim originates within a particular religious tradition. It's informed by faith. So this understanding of post-secularism means a continuation of secularism. So we're continuing secularism by minimizing the role of religion, but we're not trying to expel it. We're not trying to privatize it. We're saying, come into the public sphere, we're going to include your claims, but at the same time, we need to understand this. So in this way, you can't have, let's say, the application of Sharia law in Germany or within a post-secular polity for Habermas, because this is only particular. This is particular to a certain group. So the argument would be, therefore, you need to find a universal system of law which perhaps has some input from Islamic jurisprudence. But Islamic jurisprudence then needs to be translated into a language which is intelligible to all. So this will be the Habermasian formulation of this. Can you see any problems with this, or do you have any questions about this? Yep.
One of the questions I had was, while you were talking about this, one thing came to mind is this recent debate around the Uniform Civil Code in India, okay, where, and also this whole idea of the Muslim Reformation that is also in news these days. So here we have this particular problem of how this particular concept is to be applied in societies like us.
Yeah, very good, Pat. Yeah, go ahead.
So like if we are going to take religious or the cultural context, in dealing with human security or in the more secular human security, so the problem could be that there are religions, for example in India, we talk about Hinduism. It has, like we said yesterday also, it has structural, starts with the structural inequality. So if we take that as the cultural context or the religious context, how are we going to lead towards a more equal and better world in that sense? Or if you look at the point of gender also in a lot of religions, not only Islam or Hinduism, or every religion discriminates towards the women. So how can we take such a thing as a race?
Very good question, and I think this is a question perhaps which we will pose later in the discussion. Particularly, I have not introduced you to post-secular human security yet. All I've done is introduce you to Habermas's concept of the post-secular. So for Habermas, the public sphere is founded on ideas of freedom and equality. So any claim which seeks to exclude others cannot be included within the public sphere. So in this sense, if I'm not making the argument that Hinduism is based on the legitimation of social or structural inequalities. But if we are to make that argument, then for Habermas, this should not be allowed to enter the public sphere. Only claims which are premised upon universality and equality are allowed in to the public sphere for him, because he's committed to Enlightenment ideals.
One more question.
Yeah.
Sir, when we talk about human security and the problems like environment, financial crisis or global terrorism, why we need to look at it from the perspective of religion? When someone is dying of hunger, then why we have to look that kind of problem from the angle of
This is a question which needs to come up in the discussion. At the moment, I'm asking you whether you've understood Habermas's concept of the post-secular. Okay, yeah.
I'm Jahan Shah Safari from English department. Actually, I think it is very relevant, religion, very relevant to the security, especially what we have now in Afghanistan, what we had in Afghanistan and Syria by, the ISIS or, Taliban, what they did with cultural heritage heritage of, people. So they destroyed Bamyan, they destroyed, some parts of Kurdistan or Syria that are my case studies of my research. So I think it's very relative. And also, without a hegemonic power, we cannot be free from the hegemonic religious thoughts, because we have less seculars than religious people. So, and in other words, we have also, the mind, the thoughts of seculars are more tolerant than the thoughts of religious people, especially extremists.
Okay, again, I think this is a very good contribution, but it's not directly related to the question on the post-secular from Habermas's point of view. So I think what will be best is if I ask the question, and you no, and you answer, which would be, the question I have is, what problems can you potentially see with Habermas's idea of the post-secular? You'll have a time for discussion later, so we'll have time for discussion later. But I do want to know what problems you may be able to see with Habermas's conception of the post-secular. Yeah, go ahead.
Sir, I think it's with the process. I mean, I don't understand what kind of a process we can have to make religious values universally intelligible to a different community.
Good.
And is it by a legalization, a legislation process, or by a kind of a assimilation process, kind of, I mean, particularly in the example you quote, the Muslim migrants living in Germany, and apart from Sharia law, that is far-fetched, but how can you have those values, transformed or translated into a language which is intelligible to German community? And by doing so, this is kind of, you secularizing very essentials of religion, thereby losing the very idea of religious values.
Yeah, excellent. I would completely agree with you. I think that if we look at Habermas's perspective, Habermas is following Weber in that he would consider himself religiously tone deaf. What religiously tone deaf means is he's not a believer. So his main interest is in the public sphere. But for those who are believers, how can you extract, let's say, a particular aspect of your belief, divorce it from your faith, and then secularize it so it becomes part of a public sphere? I think this is the challenge. If we look, let's say, at the entire history of Pakistan, Pakistan is a secular state. It was based on secularism. But at the same time, what type of secularism can emerge from a society in which was explicitly founded upon a particular understanding of religion as a nation? So it's the same sort of argument. If we look at European societies, Israel would be a great example within the Middle East, in that it's a secular society, but it's based on secular Zionism, is based on Judaic belief beforehand. So in this sense, what does the secular mean? How can you divorce a particular religious faith, a particular claim from the entire framework which gave rise to it? It's like taking a letter from one alphabet and inserting it into another alphabet. It's the same idea. Yep.
So I have this question. Even if, say, you've come up with this universal definition or a secular definition of an amalgamation of all the religions, but then how do you expect all the individuals to abide by it? Because, say, do you expect to be translated into a law, and then you expect the individuals to accept the fact that, yes, okay, fine, this is the particular definition of secular religion, and then follow it? Because in that sense, you are losing, again, the very ethnicity of, all the religions. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think as a good German, Habermas expects people to follow the law. So his idea is that people will follow, but I think that's a very valid point. Okay, final point, then I'd like to move on.
Hello, sir. Myself is Madhur, sir. Sir, why actually we need to secularize the societies? Is it because that some followers of among every religion, some followers misinterpret it? Or is it because there are many religions, they can't coexist? Or is it because religions are a barrier for the development of society. Why actually we need the secularization of societies? And is it possible to secularize each and every person?
Well, I think instead of a question, this should be a statement. So if you're making this as a statement, then I think it's completely relevant to what we're saying. So if it's a question, then it opens it up for discussion. But as a statement, I think you've identified the problem.
As well as a statement.
Yeah, it's a problem with Habermas's framework in that he normatively valorizes the secular public sphere. He wants to protect the secular public sphere.
If there is a problem with the religion, then why not wipe it altogether?
What?
If there is a problem with the religion which we want to secularize,
Yeah.
then why not wipe it altogether? If there is a problem.
Yeah.
If there is not a problem, then what is the need of secularization?
Well, that allows me to come on to a second understanding of secularism. That's what I would like to get at. So I've introduced you to one understanding of secularism. Another understanding of secularism is secularism as rupture. And I've been very influenced by the work of Ashish Nandi, amongst others, on this. So the idea of secularism as rupture says that basically takes your point or your question. Why do we need to secularize? Why valorize the idea of a secular public sphere? So post-secularism here is based on an assumption that the secular enlightenment project has failed. And that the only way in which multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religious societies can arrange themselves and govern themselves is by taking into account various claims which come from particular religions. So the idea here is you don't need to translate them into a language which is intelligible, but you do need to represent them in a way so others can understand where your faith is coming from. So the argument here, let me finish and then we can pause for questions. The argument I'm making is that if we are to understand this understanding of post-secularism, or privilege the idea of post-secularism as rupture, we have to take cultural difference seriously. We have to take differences seriously, not just commonalities. Differences can't be solved by merely assimilating others. As you know, you can make the same arguments within South Asia as you can within Europe, in which minority religious traditions need to be assimilated to the public sphere, integrated in the public sphere. It means that they have to adopt the cultural values of the dominant society. But religion here, I think, can be seen as an important source of cultural difference. And if we were to turn back to Agamben's use of Aristotle's terms of zoe and bios, we can see it also helps recover the idea of the bios of human existence, ideas of agency, ideas of human beings as being part of certain communities, freedom too, human flourishing in this sense, rather than bare life which needs to be protected merely from fear or want. So what I tried to do in this table is to pluralize human security, or to use Dipesh Chakrabarty's work terms, provincialize human security, looking at South Asia. And the argument I'm trying to make here is not so much that all Hindus or all Muslims think exactly the same way. That's not the perspective. That's not the point I'm trying to make. This table, by the way, is in one of your readings, so you don't need to take it down. It's in the reading on post-secular human security. So all of this lecture, all of the notes would be in that article. So that's not what I'm trying to do. What I'm trying to illustrate, and this was primarily for a Western audience, was how our understanding of human security, conventional understandings of human security, are premised on secular understandings, which are only one understandings amongst many. Secularism, if we look at the work of Tal al-Assad and also Jose Casanova and Charles Taylor, amongst others, came out, the secular age in which we live, was really an outgrowth of a prior Christian age. So a lot of the ideas, including that of the state, I follow Carl Schmitt in that argument, which are seen, are unquestioned as the assumptions upon which international relations is based, have their roots in this tradition. Ideas such as rights, for example, human rights. This really arises from a Protestant tradition of thought. Ideas of the individual as well can be seen as coming from Protestant ideas, or at least coming from Judeo-Christian ideas, prioritizing the individual over the community or the family. So there's a close association between secular understandings of human security and Christianity. So if we look at the idea of freedom, rights, and security provided by the state or an international community of sovereign states, within Christianity, the community is Christendom. Freedom is salvation. So freedom lies in being saved. Now there is I would say, certainly an implicit connotation of salvation every time we use the term emancipation. When we use the term emancipation, and even when we use the term empowerment, we are trying to save others. This is particularly true in international NGOs, where there's an assumption of trying to save others. Now, if you talk to most Christian missionaries, they would say, yes, this is important because this is our faith. I'm trying to save you because I want to be a good Christian. This is part of my framework. But the secularization of Christianity means you have NGOs or INGOs saying, well, I know what is in their interests. I need to help them. It's the same argument. It's based on me or us saving others. But these others, the views of these others are not taken into account. But the difference is, I am doing it for them. I'm not doing it for myself. So if you grew up in a Christian missionary framework, you're trying to save others because this is what you do as a Christian. You're not pretending to say that I'm saving others because others want me to save them. And I think this is an important difference in terms of secularism and Christianity. But if we look at Islam, if we look at Hinduism, Buddhism, and Sikhism, I'm just going to, we can critique these labels later. But the assumption here, what I'm trying to do here, the objective here, is merely to provincialize and to pluralize different understandings of human security. There are different understandings of community, different understandings of freedom, and different understandings of security. So through a process of pluralization, making the differences explicit, then maybe we can start, within the tradition of critical theory, a conversation on human security, which may lead, in Gadamer's words, to a fusion of horizons, or may not lead to a fusion of horizons. A fusion of horizons means a universal conception which comes through agreement, through conversation, through acknowledging difference. But at least this is preferable than just having a secularized understanding of human security imposed upon others. Okay, if you would allow me to finish, what I'd like to do is show the next slide, which I think will be the final slide and then before the conclusion. And then we'll have a 30-minute break. And after the 30-minute break, we'll have a discussion. And after the discussion, we will have a presentation on human security in South Asia by Serbia over there, and we can have a discussion between 4:30 and 5. So please make a note of any questions you want to ask about this table. This is tentative. That's why there's a question mark. I want your feedback on this. However, I acknowledge that there are problems with understanding human security and articulating different conceptions of human security based on religio-cultural contexts. This is firstly because religion can itself be seen as a source of cultural violence, masking patriarchal power relations. So when we invoke, let's say, a particular religion, this could be Christianity, this could be Hinduism, it could be Islam, to exclude women, let's say, from education, to exclude women from the public sphere, then we are performing a form of violence. This sort of masks patriarchal power relations. So religion here is a shorthand for patriarchy. It's easy to use tradition and religion. Second objection is that the religious-secular dichotomy is itself a product of Enlightenment thought. If we look at the genealogy of the concept of the secular, the origins of the concept of the secular, it refers to those monks within the Christian tradition who could live outside of monasteries. So the term secular came from a Christian tradition, from a Christian worldview. Can this be applied to others? And perhaps the most important objection to deploying a post-secular framework is not to look at secularism itself, but to look at religion. Can we talk of religion? What sense does it make to talk of Hinduism as a religion when not only are there 1 billion Hindu people, but they worship different gods, have different practices, and the entire religio-philosophical basis of Hinduism developed before we had a word to describe religion. So looking at the work of Jacques Derrida, he bases his understanding very much on Abrahamic cultures, so Islam, Christianity, Judaism. And his argument is that the Judeo-Christian concept of religio is untranslatable outside of these three great traditions. So it makes no sense to talk in terms of Hinduism as a religion, Sikhism as a religion, or Buddhism as a religion. This is particularly true in the work of Tomoko Masazawa, who's looked at Buddhism, the 19th century construction of Buddhism. Therefore, religion is alien to most non-Western societies, particularly in Japan. Everybody says we're not religious. They say we're not religious, but every new year they go to a Shinto shrine. Every time somebody dies or gets married, they go to a Buddhist priest. And they say, we're not religious. You people in South Asia, you're religious. We can't understand you. We're not religious. But if you go to places like Kyoto, you'll just see lots of shrines of different religions. The difference here is that they have a more eclectic understanding of religion, where it's not exclusive. You cannot be, it's a non-Abrahamic conception of religion, so you can be Shinto and Buddhist. Just as arguably, you can be Hindu and Buddhist, or before the 19th century, Hindu and Sikh. So the argument I'm trying to make, so I acknowledge all of these objections. These are real problems. We're looking at post-secular human security and to try and desecularize human security. The genealogy of secularism within a particular tradition, the colonial construction of religion. But the point I'm trying to make is that in a society such as South Asia, religion is still vital to our everyday life. It's part of the vital core of what makes us human. So in this sense, because our values come from religion, we need to make these values explicit. And we need to enter into a conversation with others who do not share our values. Okay, so the two questions for discussion I have, which I'd like you to look at, I think the first one we have looked at, we have discussed. How does a critical approach to human security differ from a problem-solving approach? This, I think, we have discussed in the beginning of this lecture. But we haven't had time to look at post-secularism and to discuss post-secularism. So how do post-secular approaches to human security differ from other critical approaches? And finally, perhaps the most important question, at least for me, is the post-secular approach to human security desirable? Do we need it, or do we not need it? So I would like to focus very much on the second and third questions. So firstly, I'll ask you how it differs from other critical approaches, but most importantly, in your view, is a post-secular approach to human security desirable? Do we need it? Do we want it? What does it allow us to do? Okay, let us break here for 30 minutes. Like this, yeah. This is okay? Yeah, fine. Okay, can you come and sit down, please, those who... Okay, what we're going to do now is we are going to look at these questions for discussion, particularly the third question for discussion. Beforehand, I'll take questions. Our discussion will end at 4 o'clock at the latest. And then we have a special guest lecture all the way now from Bangalore, not Ranchi. Surbikyati, who finished her MA dissertation, which looked at post-secularism and communal violence, looking at Muzaffarnagar. And she will be presenting her work, which has already been internationally presented at the ISA Asia Pacific Conference in Hong Kong. And then we'll give her, you can have 30 minutes discussion based on her presentation as well. So she's looking to further develop the argument. It's on human security in South Asia, and I think it touches upon and maybe operationalizes the framework which I'm trying to use on post-secular human security. Okay, so firstly, over to you. What questions do you have? And most importantly, what would your answers be to these questions? Particularly, is a post-secular approach to human security desirable?
So I have a question. So what is the difference between ethnicity and religion? What is the difference between ethnicity and religion? And if you answer that, then my question would be that we are only, I think, talking about from a religious perspective here. But I feel that instead of including just the religion, why not to focus on ethnicity of the people?
Can I answer that? Basically, what I'm trying to use is culture. If you're asking me the difference between religion and ethnicity, this is exactly what I'm working on at the moment, religion, ethnicity, and nationalism. And I think the difference here with ethnicity is something you're born with. Oh, actually, arguably, it's not really what you're born with, but there's less possibility of change. The difference is when we look at religion, or at least in my understanding of religion, we're looking at ethical codes. We're looking at normative values. Now, if we look at ethnicity, I'm not sure what normative values there are. So let's take, for example, the recent US elections. We find that President-elect Donald Trump won a majority of all white voters. Now, I don't know what sort of values President-elect Trump has. And I don't know what sort of values he had which made white voters vote for him. So in this sense, I would say that this is different from, let's say, if we look at the Republican Party, there were candidates, most notably Ted Cruz, who clearly articulated a religious perspective. Now, there I think you have a difference, because he's arguably more dangerous than President-elect Trump, but he had an agenda, a policy which derived from Judeo-Christian values which he wanted to impose upon the United States of America. So I think that's the difference. Ethnicity, just because you're white, doesn't mean you share the same values. So that would be, I think this can be collapsed by looking at the concept of culture. So if you look at, the very idea of the foundation of Pakistan, Muhammad Ali Jinnah's speech, was based on the idea of two nations. It wasn't based on two religions. Two nations based on two different cultural understandings and frameworks. What he's trying to articulate was values, not the religion itself, but the values were different. That was his argument.
But then in some way...
Okay, follow up and then we'll...
I think another example for this question is Iraq, that almost divided into three parts: Sunni, Shia, and Kurds. Kurds are ethnic groups that not based on religion. They can be Shia, Sunni, or even non-Muslims are there, but based on the language and ethnic, they are Kurds.
So,
Good, yeah.
I do have a question. As you were saying that all the claims of different kind of religions, the claims which means by which we can be able to accommodate them in our life. I want to say that tribes don't have any religion. So how they could be included in this kind of scenario?
I think that's an excellent question, but I would turn it round. I would say, how do we know that tribes don't have any religions? Because tribes have different cultural frameworks, different values, but we don't use the term religion to describe that. Why don't we use the term religion to describe that?
So they are having different cultures.